Hi, we're Oxygen Conservation, and this is the Shoot Room Sessions. Hi, Chris.
Hello.
Welcome to the Shoot Room.
Thank you very much.
For our audience, I'm going to give you a bit of an intro. So, Director of Natural Capital, resident genius, flamboyantest dresser in the team, and one of my absolute favourite people in the world, Chris White. Who are you, and other than that, what do you do?
So I'm Chris White. I'm Director of Natural Capital at Oxygen Conservation. And what I do is I look at how we can restore natural capital across our estates and turn that into a viable business so that we can raise money to then restore more natural capital across the UK.
Nice. Can I have your career contents page, please? So the chapters of the Chris White book.
Where do you want to start?
Home, growing up kid.
Grew up in Liverpool, went to school. I was always really interested in the environment and wanted to become like a
Captain Planet.
Yeah, or a David Attenborough or whatever that job was. But when I was about 18, about to go to university, my dad was like, you don't want to take a job in the environment, you want to get a job where you get paid because you don't want to be poor. So I took a degree in philosophy, politics and economics. I thought that would be like not making a choice because I was doing three.
All our directors wanted to do environment or started with geography and then deviated off into an actual career path.
And I hadn't studied any of those subjects before. It was not a disaster, but it wasn't like the perfect choice. And was good at, I say that I was good at economics, but I got banned from economics at university.
Why did you get banned from economics at university?
Sorry for the podcast.
Okay, excellent.
You didn't have a very good work ethic. It was quite a culture shock going from Liverpool to Oxford University, so it was quite a strange adjustment period.
Okay.
Anyway, graduated with a degree, and then thought I'd become an investment banker. Not sure why I thought that. I just thought that's what you do. It's either that or become a politician. Didn't want to do that.
No.
But it was 2008 and it was the global financial crisis, which I'd written about in my final essay.
So you went, I'm going to be an investment banker. I came out of university then and went, oh God, it's the public sector.
But yeah, didn't end up as a banker. Basically ended up unemployed in Liverpool for about 2 years, doing various kind of odd jobs.
What was the worst?
The worst experience was queuing up for a job application in Asda, and there was like 1,000 people queuing up, and I didn't get the job. I also got Also got rejected from Greggs.
Were you a vegan at that point still?
No. They just asked me why I wanted to job at Greggs, and I said I just need a job.
I mean, I kind of like that as an answer.
Yeah, they said I wasn't passionate about the sort of savoury market.
I mean, how does one become... I suppose some people are really passionate about Greggs. I didn't know that one of our most iconic hires as a company had previously been rejected by Asda. Yeah, okay. I feel a little differently, but we'll keep going. So the Asda years, right? Okay, excellent. It's a good job we've got a professional head of people now to make sure this stuff doesn't happen again.
I would not have got through our screening criteria now.
No, well, I don't think I would. Neither of us would get hired now. Yeah.
This is a long way round.
No, it's all good. It's all good.
At that point, I was kind of like a bit of a lost what to do with my life, and ended up thinking I should do further study, and thought I could get into the environment. I'd always been good at maths and like the economic side, aside from
the banning. Yeah.
And then I heard about environmental economics as an idea where you could bring together economics and the environment together. I thought that could be good. Got a scholarship to go to Australia, and then spent a few years as a master's student there. And then got a job with the university doing a kind of...
Just before we leave Australia a bit, so you and I have this kind of thing where... So I wasn't very good academically younger, like really bad, school, etc., which you don't believe, right? And I don't believe the world cricket. We'll come on to cricket. I don't believe the wilderness years either, because like, how's that a thing? From like super duper... Like, did you get a B at school?
No, I got straight A stars.
Okay, so from that to the wilderness years, the fabled Asda issue, through to where we are now is a heck of a... Yeah, my down limb was just earlier, I think. Okay, so we're in Australia. Yeah. Whereabouts?
Canberra, which I might have stayed longer if it hadn't been Canberra. But yeah, after a while I got tired of Canberra and wanted to move to like a big city and get involved in like where everything was happening. It felt like there was stuff starting to happen environmentally, and I wanted to be kind of part of it. I mean, Australia was really interesting. There was a lot of focus on water there. We were working on this big water market reform where the water system from the Murray-Darling had basically dried up and was no longer reaching the sea. A lot of that was because people were growing rice in the middle of this increasingly arid and climatic troubled area. And so there's this idea of why don't we use the private sector and use markets and create a system where you could buy back water for the environment to allow it to restore its flows. So I was working on that, which I thought was like the perfect extension of what I've been studying and bringing together economics, designing markets and solving real world environmental problems, which is why I got really excited about environmental economics. It was like this moment of, oh wait, that's how the world works. It's based on economic systems and we can use those to solve real world environmental problems. And that was a bit of a like light bulb moment for me of like giving me a thing to do in my life. Anyway, sorry, it's complete random.
No, it's great. It's great. What year is that? So what year is that light bulb moment?
2010.
2010. Okay. So still working in Canberra, and you went from Canberra to
London.
Came back to London. Okay.
And got a job in a consultancy, which they were looking for someone. They'd kind of like been increasingly hearing words like ecosystem services and natural capital, and they were like, "You studied this, right?" And I was like, "Yeah." And so I became that guy who did that for the consultancy. And at the time, it was sort of a very niche area in a big organization. And by the time I left, like 10 years later, I mean, when I was first starting, I was knocking on doors trying to get people to talk about natural capital. And then 10 years later, it was this barrage of people trying to talk about natural capital.
Yeah.
So that change has been really exciting to see.
Interesting. So to do a little bit about your time in consultancy, so 10 years, how many roles, how did that evolve and grow?
I really liked consultancy in that I got to work on lots of very different projects. And it felt like, I think, especially because natural capital was this sort of new emerging sector, the stuff I was doing was really like novel and interesting, and a lot of it was like big picture policy stuff. So working on a lot of the big reforms that we're seeing. So the big markets now are on the Woodland Peatland Code, ENG, ELMS, those sort of things. That was the kind of policy work I was doing. And then working internationally in the kind of big carbon projects was really interesting, and see how that fit together on large scale conservation projects. And then also, I think later on in that period when businesses start to get interest, started looking at it from a less a sort of theoretical academic angle to a more, how do we do this in practice? How do we get private money into it? And how do we make it work as a kind of business model for people to invest in?
Nice. And how did, I usually say, how did you become aware of OC? But how did OC become aware of you, Chris?
I think the story is, I was doing a project which was, I got interested in kind of like particularly conservation and sort of rewilding and species work and what was going on in the UK, which has always been my like kind of long-term interest. I kind of set up a charity with some others which was focused on kind of these sorts of projects. And then
shout out to the charity.
It's the Lifescape Project.
Okay.
It's a fantastic charity. But yeah, I'd been in consultancy about 5 years, got bored, taken a year out, traveled the world, got really excited when I came back to kind of do something differently. So through the charity, I set up this project where it was kind of like a natural capital restoration project in the Highlands with some landowners, the company I was working for, the charity, and a university partner. And the idea was, we'll just set up this like outdoor laboratory where we restore the environment, release animals, pick up natural process, and then just cover it with drones and robots and sensors and start to measure everything that's happening, and then use that to try scale and solve some of the challenges that we were talking about theoretically in practice.
Yep.
And have this like safe space for learning and trying. And so the BBC did a hour-long special on Countryfile about the project. I think someone at OH had seen it.
One of our board members, sorry.
Yeah, we should hire this guy who looks as mad as you.
Yeah, they did say, we should definitely try and meet that guy. So I spoke to a friend of a friend out there. Shout out to Sean Tolfrey for making that possible. And then we spoke, and you thought I was full of shit.
Yeah.
Talk about your experiences of that first meeting.
Well, I mean, not many people at that time were saying, yeah, I'm going to raise £1 billion and protect 250,000 acres of the UK for nature and create a unicorn business that was going to make this a massive scale thing. Most people were sort of...
And we had a few hundred acres at this point, right?
At this point, you were just the guy with
me, Dan, and a few hundred acres. Yeah.
And I mean, that's everything I ever wanted to hear and anybody saying it, but it just seemed like who is this guy? Like, surely this is not real. Because it didn't seem real. Nobody else was talking about that level of ambition or scale. And yeah, I thought you were full of shit.
Yeah, nice. So we had a couple more meetings, and then I tricked you into helping me write a job description for yourself. Excellent. And then you sort of later went, yeah, I might do that. And do you remember the interview process?
Yeah.
Can you talk our audience through that?
We just had a great chat for hours.
Yeah. So the former head of HR Auction House was sat listening to this. Did she speak?
No, not once.
And for 3 hours, we were just back and forward on ideas and concepts. I think as we wrapped up, she went, well, that was something. I found it reassuringly pacing. It was lovely in terms of that.
It was better than my Greg's interview.
Was it? But not as good as Asda.
No.
Not as good as Asda. Okay. One of the things that made me so happy was about, 3 months into after you arriving, me checking in and going. I mean, we spoke in that interim period. It wasn't like I left you alone for 3 months, but just going, is what I promised and sold you what you got? And you just looked at me and went, no, it's better. And I was like, yes, result. That's what we want to do.
It did. I mean, the subsequent conversations that we had, it definitely became clear that you meant what you were saying, and you were really like, this is real. I'm passionate about this.
So even if I was insane, I believed it.
Yeah.
Right,
okay. This guy, he believes his own insanity. I want to be a part of it. And it was, if anything, more.
It's the nicest thing anyone's ever said to me. He believes his own insanity.
But yeah, and that was it was just this moment of hope that we could actually, if this is real, we could actually do something. It wouldn't just be talking about it and doing little one-off projects here and there, raising just enough capital to scrape by and do the next little project. This was this is going to transform the way we do things, and that is just, it makes you feel like you can actually do something about the kind of onslaught of terrible news and environmental collapse. So yeah, you gave me hope, which is something I'll always.
Thanks, mate. And how long have you been with us?
About a year and a half, I think.
How has so much happened in that time period?
It's been crazy.
Yeah. One of the things that rules on recruitment is only recruit people better than us in a meaningful way. So I had the fragments of a model, an idea of how we would value things, which was rough and crude and allowed us to buy a couple of sites. But that's one of the things you've revolutionised since you've come in, and it's an incredible piece of work, you and James now. Can you describe to people how we look at land from afar? I sometimes say we're a data company. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah. When we were first talking about it, you were saying the typical way people view land is through a sort of idealistic or romantic way of looking at whether
it's close, it's pretty, it's it's a lovely bit of woodland. Okay, what does that mean?
Yeah, and what you wanted to do is look at it from a data perspective and understand basically everything we could know about the site, how it could work, what it could be, and what that would mean for the business case, and how we could secure investment to actually make it work in practice. So basically, we were working with Lara, who's our fantastic GIS expert. So she scrapes, I think, about 50 GIS data layers now for each site that we look at. And it's all automated, so it takes, seconds to do it. And then within that, we get this picture of everything from water to soil to air to carbon to habitats to species, everything that's we understand about the site. And then we look at if we change each of these parameters, what that means for the things that we're interested in. So what's it mean for carbon sequestration? What's it mean for biodiversity? What's it mean for housing, for wind, for food production? And then we look at all these different impacts that we could have on the site. We look at the cost of delivering them, what the revenue might be if we actually do deliver them over time, and pull all those financial models together, and we get this high level picture of what the site is now, what it could be, and how that value that we see compares against what the market sees it at. And the kind of hope of this data approach, and one thing I know we're both passionate about, is kind of sports data and how that kind of
hugely passionate, especially cricket.
How Crickonomics, one of my favourite books, is.
I made Chris read Crickonomics. Did you read it, or was that an audio book when you had your eyes done?
Books I had, yeah.
Chris recently had eye surgery, and a day and a half in. So I sent Chris some vegan chocolate for when he had his eye surgery with a note that read, half of these are for you, half are for your wife for putting up with you, because I know what you're going to be like. A day and a half in, it was a weekend. Can we talk? I'm so bored. And you're Lizzie messaged me before that asking for podcast and audiobook recommendations. It didn't even last a couple of days.
Well, I didn't realise when I downloaded it as an audiobook that most of it was table.
Oh, yeah.
Read down for an hour long of column 1.
And you couldn't see to skip past it.
So I think I listened to about 18 hours of cricket tables.
Oh, I wish I'd done that on purpose. I didn't even do it on purpose. That's brilliant. Quickonomics, give me a look out there. Brilliant book.
But
Okay.
yeah, I love that, like data and soconomics and what.
Because it's not in land.
Yeah.
People aren't using debt. We had a call the other day with a potential party that's interested in investing in us, and they said, "Oh, when are the next people coming doing this?" And I'm like, "We haven't seen it yet, have we? Anyone who's approaching land in this same way?"
Yeah, and you can see it. That kind of data-led approach has revolutionised sports, and it allows people to not, coaches and scouts used to pick on, like the look of that kind of thing.
Moneyball.
Yeah, and now we're using a sophisticated data model to make those kind of transfers, and we're trying to adopt that model for land. So looking at not like what it looks like, but what does the data say, where is the opportunity, and how could, if we're going to, leverage millions, if not billions of pounds, how do we use data to make sure it's allocated in a way it's going to have real-world positive impact? Yeah.
So that's our approach to database land. Love it. So that takes us on to the principal thing you're here to do, natural capital. What is natural capital, Chris?
This is a serious bit now.
Yeah.
Natural capital. So I think of it as it's basically just the natural world around us. So the soil producing food, the air that we breathe, water, drink, woodlands that are sequestering carbon, grasslands where we go out and exercise, recreate. Like, it is just the natural world. So there's nothing new in the idea of natural capital. The thing that's different is the way we look at it. So previously, in the way that like our financial system has been set up, we look at things like factories as capital assets, that they've got value because they produce things that are of value to society. And we spend all our money in kind of like maintaining, investing these kind of assets. In that kind of system, you don't look at woodlands and wetlands as valuable assets, and we don't put finance into looking at them and investing them, restoring them, and manage them. And the idea of natural capital is to say that actually these are the most important assets we have. Without them, we don't have anything else. And if we're not maintaining them and keeping them going, we're losing all these like critically important services like air, water, soil, food, these things that are critical to everything else we're doing. So this idea of natural capital is that we look at it as an asset. We look at maintaining those assets and restoring them and keeping them in good condition. And that sets up this really important flow of services that have got value to us and society over the next 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years.
How do you respond to the challenge we sometimes get that putting a financial value on nature is immoral?
In my like early consultant days, I was at the World Forum for Natural Capital to like talk about a project we were doing. And as we walked in, there was a mass protest. So people were like sort of egging people and like dressing up and saying this is the big sell-off of nature. There was a lot of like heat and anger about it. It seems to have dissipated a little bit now, but at that point, I think there was a real like visceral emotional reaction of like, the capitalist system that we've got has destroyed the environment. The last thing we want to do is give it to the capitalist system to restore it.
I have some sympathy for that approach.
You can feel like why people are worried about that. But I think unless we're going to completely overhaul the system we have, which I don't think is going to happen in the next 10, 20, 30 years when we need to stop climate change and biodiversity loss, we need to work with the system we have, and that means using markets and financial instruments to allocate more finance towards nature, because it hasn't been allocated in this system in that way before. And so, yes, it's a risk and people are worried about the environment, but we've got to do something. We've got to try all the tools that are available to us, because we're in this like moment of crisis. We've got to act.
Yeah. I think one of my biggest experiences in OC is the complexity of everything, every interaction of the environment, economic, social, sustainability, impact of what we're doing. And the reality is in some ways putting a financial value on nature doesn't feel the nicest thing to do. When you're in an incredible woodland, you're like, this is brilliant. You're not thinking, oh, well, that's £4.50 and that's... So we went to view a site on the Isle of Wight with an agent we hadn't seen before, and I was like, oh, that tree's beautiful. And he's like, I had no idea you'd be... I'm like, no, I'm not saying that tree's valuable. I'm saying it's beautiful and it's an amazing habitat and things like that. It's great. So, but the reality is we need a mechanism of making society value nature, because that will allow the funding we need to protect the environment flow to it. Right now, it is financially so much more beneficial to destroy the environment than it is to protect, to nurture and improve it. Got to redress that balance, haven't we?
Exactly. And if we don't put a financial value on nature, then someone else will, and the value they'll put on it is zero. So, yeah.
Complete destruction of it. So on that, we acquire a site. How do we even begin to construct a baseline of a carbon or from a nature perspective? How do we approach that?
So first thing, again, as a data company, we collect as much data as we can. So Dan, head of environment, starts pulling in together surveys. We get consultants to kind of start understanding the
Independent ones?
Yeah, always independent. We
Okay.
go, greenwashing is a really big issue in these kind of emerging carbon and biodiversity markets. Everything we've got to do has got to be really high quality, really data led, and based on real science.
Yeah, we can't mark our own homework.
No, and yeah, other people will, and it's not gonna work. Those projects won't deliver the impacts they're going to need to deliver. But yeah, we pull together a data-led understanding, and this, when we do our first set of modelling, it's kind of high level based on kind of data sets that are online and computer based. When we've got a site, we can send people in on the ground to actually collect real data and kind of get a much more detailed understanding of the site. And then it's usually a process of 12 to 18 to 24 months of talking to people, lots of different specialists, people in the community, people like the Woodland Trust, Wildlife Trust, regulators, people who've lived and worked there for years.
It's borrowed experience, right?
Yeah.
The eyes and ears and knowledge of a site coming to us in that way.
Yeah, and pulling together a lot of loads of different perspectives. So getting, what would you, if you're looking at this from an agricultural lens, what should we do here? If you're looking at it from a pure hard conservation lens, what would we do? What if we're looking at it from property? What about renewables provision and ecotourism? Pulling together these different ways of looking at the land. And then hopefully through that process, we start to, encounter these really interesting trade-offs. Like, what do we do with this piece of land? What's the best thing to do for it ecologically, socially, economically? And going through that, quite, robust, challenging process. I think by the end of it, what we aim to get is this vision for the site, which pulls together a lot of complicated kind of trade-offs, but has a really clear vision that says, this is what we want to do and why. We've thought about it, we've argued it through, and we believe that this is the right thing to do for the site, and this is how we got there.
It's one of my favourite things we do as a team, because we have people expressing such strong views in their respective fields, and because we have a really sort of playful team dynamic, it's full throttle, everyone's in on it, and we come out with that view that, okay, this is the best thing that we think as custodians of this landscape to do. Yeah, and there's trade-off. It is complete trade-offs, compromises, challenges and stuff. Over the past 12 months, can you think of any particular areas where you arrived at OC with one view and that's been changed or adapted over time?
I mean, farming's a big one for me. I mean, I'm a vegan. I kind of see animal agriculture as the worst thing in the world,
Yeah.
in a lot of ways. But my view on it has changed quite a lot. On my first day, I met Katie and we picked up a kind of dead pig carcass.
That's accurate. You did, yeah.
Which is a challenge for me.
For avoidance of doubt, to feed people for a meal, not just for fun.
Just for fun.
No.
One of the things we want to do with the agricultural side of things is to make sure that we're producing food. I totally get that, we can't do conservation where you just put a fence up and say it's for nature now. It's got to work for people, and that means we've got to tackle things like food and housing and renewables and that sort of thing.
Sheep and deer.
Yeah, and it has these questions like, what should we do? And I previously kind of seen particularly, cattle as, it's bad for greenhouse gases, we shouldn't do it. And now I'm looking at today arguing that we should be having agriculture in the landscape. It's a key part of what we're doing, and we need cattle in the landscape to play that kind of functional role.
I think Simon, our senior ecologist, is a great advocate for that. Him describing the sort of functionality that cattle offer in a landscape has certainly made me see it in different ways.
Yeah, I think previously, before I'd kind of actually grapple with some of the issues, I'd had this view that it's bad, we shouldn't do it. And now I think it's not that it's bad, it's you can do it in a good or a bad way, and we've got to shift the way we do things. And you can do agriculture as part of conservation. It can be really, and when you can do it right, and you can have food production alongside conservation, that is what's really powerful and exciting.
Yeah, context and place is so important. It's a phrase Andrew, our head of people, uses. We don't have the luxury of black and white.
Yeah.
Everything we're operating in is shades of grey.
Yeah.
My version of that, I think, the journey I've been on is deer. So across the country, huge numbers of deer everywhere. I'm going to get ripped for that. Huge number of deer everywhere. And way more than we think, because we've recently done a drone survey in Vigeldi, a double thermal drone loop. Really amazing contractor coming to help us look at that. And we thought we had 10 per square kilometre, sorry. We've got 26. So if we've seen that on the pocket we've got there, what's the real number? And I listened and learnt as much as I could to the prevailing culture of these estates, and I heard that a sporting enterprise is the most respectful thing to do for the environment and for the local community, so letting out individual sporting days. Then Tara, our amazing estate manager, who from the local community, literally the neighbouring estate, born there, expert in this environment, she was able to explain, no, Rich, from a local perspective, that's cultural imperialism. That is the English coming and taking from the Scottish landscape and offering very little back to the... And I suddenly was like, you get those thoughts or ideas that like they hit you in the face. So you're like, how didn't I see that?
Yeah.
And that's been the journey I've been on with Deer, and then meeting some amazing teams that are managing Deer number. And the reality is, we do need to approach it in a more systematic way if we want to give nature a chance. But that sits terribly as well, because I won't swat a fly. I don't want to kill anything. So the fact that we are going to have to manage, and when we say manage, we mean kill a huge number of deer across the country to allow conservation, that's a horrible dichotomy, and one that, we just have to live with, do as respectfully as possible, try and route that venison to the food chain and make better value of it. But it's tough, right?
Yeah, it is tough. And there is no sort of like, kind of fairy tale scenario where everything works perfectly and everything's just really good. You've got to make difficult trade-offs, and it's a really complicated thing. But the fact that we're actually like, what gives me hope and makes me excited is that we're actually having these discussions and sitting down and talking it through, and then trying to solve problems that are, that are really difficult. Yeah, it's exciting.
We have the hard conversations. I'm going to take a break so we can come back for part 2. So we'll see you in a couple of minutes. Welcome back, Chris.
Thank you very much.
Part 2. Let's deep dive some more natural capital. So I want you to take me through how we grow natural capital at a site. So pick one. Totally know it's Invergeldy in your head. So we're at Invergeldy. How do we improve the natural capital of that place?
So we did a really interesting piece of work, again, with the Landscape Project charity. We were looking at restoring natural processes and what that looked like over a 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 year, 100-year horizon. And the key thing that came out of that discussion, there were a lot of people feeding into, ecologists, farm...
You've got some water down there. I'll stall for time.
Yeah.
So lots of people coming up to the site, neighbouring estate owners, local experts, people who've known the estate for a while, the estate manager there, and the Landscape Project, and...
Oxygen conservation.
I was segueing back across to you to keep talking.
That checked out.
Nice. Good news.
But yeah, one of the key things really interesting that came out of that conversation was we've got to basically restore the basic fundamental building blocks of that ecosystem, because it had been managed intensively for grouse and sheep farming. It was missing a lot of the key things it needed to play a functional role. And that basically meant restoring a full range of vegetation complexity. So we needed grasslands, we needed shrub areas, scrubs, up to trees and large areas of woodland creation, as well as restoration of the hydrological system and the peat bogs that were there. So it was basically, the way we've been looking at it is looking at all the components of it and the kind of the habitats that they play, what's missing from those in terms of the vegetation community and the hydrological processes in the soil, and then how we can restore those to a functioning state so that they can then start to support the much wider range of biodiversity that could be in the landscape. But it was one of those things of, you can't just jump straight into kind of putting species back into the landscape. We've got to put the building blocks there to allow them to recover.
It's where that time period of ownership is so important before action, right?
Yeah, and it's kind of like terrifying when you look at the time period. We're talking about, the Invergeldy were maybe 2,000 or 3,000, 4,000 acres of native woodland creation. This is going to be a 100-year project before we're kind of before we're starting to really realise the things that we're talking about today.
I mean, the days and weeks and seasons, nature doesn't care. They're constructs of hours, in terms of a calendar. It's going to take its time and be patient and do what it needs to do. Everyone's just looking that way because there's some noise outside the shoot room, so we're good to go, apparently.
There's a real challenge there, taking you talk about natural capital restoration over a 100-year project. You try to put that into a spreadsheet and prevent it to an investor.
Doesn't help the IRR, does it?
They don't fit into a normal way of looking at return on investment and capital allocation. So
that's why we always talk about being the world's first unicorn conservation company, because you need that critical scale and mass and excitement to pull up the whole industry so that underneath that envelope things are operating and developing, and the understanding and the systems and the processes and the financial instruments and even how you deal with any of these things from a tax or a documentation or a banking perspective. We need enough of excitement and mass to create that economy to move. So we're back up at Invergeldy.
Yep.
We're ready to plant trees, we're ready to restore peatland. What else might we do to grow natural capital?
The two key things are planting loads of trees and restoring the peat bogs. one of the things we're looking at the moment is that like adding in the sort of complex structural diversity and mosaic of habitats there. So looking at wetlands, restoring the river system, looking at kind of more open areas, whether it be cattle grazing, maybe scrub and wood pasture habitats to make it sort of more complex and open. And then alongside that, we're starting to try, so that's the sort of like looking at it from the pure, ecological or natural assets lens. Alongside that, we're trying to say, right, what does this mean for farming? What does it mean for property development? What does it mean for renewables production, for ecotourism, for carbon credits? How do we pull these together into the landscape and make it not just a sort of conservation project, but a business that's going to survive for the next 10, 20, 50, 100 years, generating the income it needs to restore that natural capital and create the jobs that needed to do it, and then produce a return on that investment so the investors who put their money into it. So it's this huge challenge of wedging together lots
It becomes a 4D puzzle.
Yeah.
So people look at landscapes like a 2D map, which already is wrong. You then put some 3 dimensions to it, and once you hit the time domain in there, you've got a 4-dimensional logic puzzle that will outlive all of us, and with each of the different strands in there working at different paces, and it is beautifully complex, but complex nonetheless. So in there, we're going to pull together a range of natural capital products and services. Why are ours going to be any different?
Yeah, that's good. Good question. I think the carbon market is probably the most understood one at the moment in terms of natural capital products broadly got in the UK. Carbon credits, biodiversity credits and water credits. Carbon, pretty much everyone now understands carbon or the idea of it and climate change and what's happening. A lot of people are now starting to get really on top of this idea of net zero and reducing our carbon emissions. A key part of that, I think, is that to get there, we're going to need to both massively reduce our emissions, but also start to take out carbon from the atmosphere that's already there through things like woodland planting that's going to remove that carbon. And there's a real risk, I think, as part of those carbon markets, and we've seen it already, that money's going to come into the sector, people are going to do things which are not always the right thing for the environment, and we just get these really perverse outcomes that are not delivering environmentally.
Hydropower schemes on land that's unknown, pushing out indigenous communities and flooding woodland.
Yeah, and if people are just kind of seeing this as a way to make money through carbon credits, you get these really terrible land use changes. And what we're absolutely committed to is that we don't just kind of chase carbon credits or anything like that. What we're designing is a landscape and a strategy for that landscape that's going to last for generations and deliver a full range of impacts.
Sounds almost like the carbon's the byproduct of the conservation activity.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, what we want to do first is do what's right for the landscape, and that's going to produce a load of things as a part of that. So it's going to produce organic food, it'll produce carbon credits, it'll produce clean energy, and these are almost byproducts of what the right thing is to do for the landscape. So I think key to all of our carbon credits is that they are going to be part of a much bigger scheme that's delivering a wide range of impacts, socially, environmentally, economically. And then also, again, we're a data company, so each of our carbon credits, we want them to be something that it's not sort of a kind of abstract thing where you're just exchanging a number on a spreadsheet somewhere. Each carbon credit is like a chance to come and see a new area of native woodland, a restored peat bog, and interact with the landscape in a visible, tangible way. So it's not just kind of buying something from somewhere else abroad. It's being able to go to these ecosystems and engage with them and kind of physically see what it means to remove carbon from the atmosphere and store it in the environment.
I think that's the key bit for me, the making a conceptual thing real and accessible and transparent and visible and touchable.
Yeah.
If you can go walk up the hill, swim in the rivers and lakes, and maybe even plant the trees in the landscape you're working in, I don't think that product exists at the moment as a real premium natural capital offering.
Yeah. And I think as well that kind of, when you get a credit, being able to have the full range of kind of like the baseline data, what's happening year on year, and being able to understand and see the change in the environment, because these are long-term projects. It's not going to be immediately there. What you want to have is that database so you can see where we started and how it's changing each year and what your kind of investment and what your credit is delivering beyond just kind of the carbon itself.
It's why partnership is so important and not transactions. So I think the partners we choose to work with in terms of that large-scale carbon offtake agreement or even portfolio level, they can share the imagery and Josh's amazing photography and videography and the stories we can tell about it, and they can own everything.
Yeah.
I quite like in some of the big corporates you're seeing the sustainability, environmental side of the businesses align. So like Low Carbon, our sort of sister company that we work with on a renewable perspective, their chief sustainability officer is the chief marketing officer as well, same person, because it is one in the same now in really great B Corp corporates, I think.
Yeah. And I think
our incredibly gifted podcast producer saved us there before the camera died, so we were able to switch out batteries and we're back in the game. So Chris, premium carbon product, and it's probably worth explaining to people how much we protect that premium side of it. Things like, we don't even run tenders for stuff, right? What do we do?
we're not allowed to use that word. You use the word. I'm allowed to use.
And why not? Why not?
Because, as you would say, a tender is a race to the bottom in terms of price and quality.
Yeah.
And what we want to do is find long-term partnerships that are worth paying for, because they're what's going to deliver impact over the long term.
Yeah, impact, scale, and change with what we're doing in terms of that. So who do we want to sell to, Chris?
We've discussed this. I think we could still go back and forth on this, because there's two kind of camps on this. We want to sell to people who are doing the right thing, and we want to say, if you're a B Corp, you've reduced your emissions, and you're doing everything right, they're exactly the kind of people that we want to be partnering with and furthering their aims and kind of scaling conservation beyond just the carbon. And then there's the sort of opposite end of that with companies that are deliberately sort of...
Oil companies.
Yeah. Shell, BP, they're using
You can't have them.
Yeah, and I think if we're seen to be using carbon credits as a mean to prop up industries that are then damaging the climate and biodiversity, it devalues what we're doing, and it almost becomes it destroys the brand that we're trying to produce, which is we're using carbon credits to further conservation in a more meaningful way. But I think there's this interesting area between there, where it's this grey thing of companies that are kind of still doing bad things and they're kind of on this journey, but they want to move in that direction, and how we can work with them to produce schemes that are kind of somewhere in between.
I could see a coherent pitch or conversation from a traditionally heavy polluting industry saying, we want to try and do the right thing. This is the step change for us doing that. I could see a conversation that developed that way. So I think I'm not sure either in terms of who we want to sell to, but I think the price point needs to be right, because we're a profitable company who want to scale conservation and use that money to drive additional work.
Another key thing on the price point, carbon credits should be punitively expensive, because they should be a financial incentive and a stick to say, actually, this is a last resort. First, we need to reduce emissions and get on top of our carbon footprint, and then only offset when it's just economically impossible to do it.
Are you done?
Yeah.
This naturally segues into the Stockdale-White curve, which I know you want to talk about, inspired by your love of cricket and the Duckworth-Lewis system. Doesn't like cricket. So Chris, I do. I genuinely do. So Chris and I, for ages, had a sort of a theoretical carbon curve in our mind. And we hadn't drawn this up or shared it, because I think we both felt everyone would be like, this is ludicrous. You can't... In fact, that happens a lot, right? We look at things at scale, this number isn't believable because it's 100 years into the future, or it's of such a scale. And then an investment conversation, they actually asked for that curve, right? So then we drew it. And are we going to share this publicly, the curve, at any point, do you reckon?
Yeah, don't see why not.
No. And how do we think carbon pricing is going to change in the future?
I mean, obviously it's very difficult to say, but...
It's a guess.
Yeah, it's a guess.
Yeah.
All of the sort of work that's going on behind the scenes, which is not kind of particularly exciting and doesn't kind of reach the sort of mainstream headlines, but there's a lot of work being done for big companies particularly to have to start talking about carbon, setting targets, doing it in a really robust way, and then using sort of offsets as a part of reaching their net zero targets. And the more people are doing this, and I think there's a large number of companies that have now set these net zero targets, each of these, as they go through this process, are looking at the carbon credit market and saying, well, actually, we're going to need credits to reach this. And as that sort of demand comes through, as we move towards these targets, say at 2030 and 2050 particularly, when we're hitting net zero, there's going to be, I think, this huge demand for, we need robust, reliable credits as part of this, or we'll never be able to make our targets. So there is a real demand for credits, and it's growing. And I think, given the uncertainty and with kind of greenwashing and some of the risky projects that have happened internationally, people want to pay a premium for projects that they can go and see in person. And it's something that they can verify themselves and take their board around to have a look at. So there is a real need for UK high quality carbon credit schemes that are delivering real positive impact. And again, the supply of that, there's not that many projects that deliver them, because it's expensive, it's long term, it's really risky, it's really complicated, and it's an uncertain model. So there's this growing demand supply imbalance, which is pushing up prices. And you can see there was a recent ecosystem marketplace again report, which is showing that UK carbon prices are starting to increase. So yeah, that's a long-winded way of saying I think we're going to see a steady growth in the carbon price up to kind of 2030 when people are really starting to get hold of their first set of targets. I think after that, we'll probably sort of see a bit of a cooling off. And then as we start getting towards 2040 and then to 2050, there'll be, again, this sort of big sort of growth and rapid spike in carbon credit prices because people are like, we need them, we need to meet our targets. And then by the time we hit 2050, I think the demand is going to start cooling off because we're either people don't need credits anymore because we made this transition to net zero, or we're just all fucked.
Oh, people don't need credits anymore because we're fucked. Yeah, that's one of the hardest burdens to carry of what we do. Right, every time something bad happens in the environment, that's good for business.
Yeah,
and that fucking sucks.
Yeah.
It's that weird, like, how is that possibly a thing? So, and that's something I think the team feel, because everyone's so climate and biodiversity aware. Like our team conversations and WhatsApp groups when these things happen about the environment, and we'll come on to politics, but when Rishi and the government pull back on something else they promised yesterday and change it to make it even worse, each one just hits. But on the flip side, it shows the need for oxygen conservation and what we're doing, and it's just an unsettling experience.
Yeah, and it makes you like want to get out of bed and work because you feel like you can, instead of feeling sort of powerless and depressed, it feels like, well, we can do something about it. And that gives you that kind of like motivation to act.
Yeah, I agree. So let's segue into politics. What do you think about our government at the minute, Chris?
Do you want an honest answer or answers fit for the podcast?
No, shoot him, right?
I think it's a disgrace. I think we've been let down as a country by the quality of our leadership. And I've kind of disengaged from politics a bit, and that's probably enforced by Lizzie, because it just makes me...
Chrissy's wonderful wife, Liz.
I think it's a disgrace.
Yeah. I completely agree.
What's a real shame is that there's been this kind of like build-up of environmental policy in the UK over a number of years. We've been seen as a leader, and we're starting to do a lot of really impactful stuff. And particularly over the last couple of years, we're starting to see that sort of just be cut back and cut back and cut back.
I couldn't believe it when he was like, we don't want to be a world leader.
Yeah.
Who in their right mind comes out and says, no, not for us. We'll just be mediocre, thanks.
And this has come off the back, like natural capital, next biggest asset class in the world.
Yep.
UK set up to be the leader in this.
Literally, the Lord of Devon, Charlie Connolly, who's amazing, is advocating, key author of the Environment Bill, advocating this is the next biggest amazing international export. Our appreciation, respect and skills about the environment could be transformational globally, and we've seen that. We've had approaches internationally about carbon credits and nature credits, but no, we don't want to do that, thanks. We could podium, we could take gold medal, not for us.
Yeah.
Middle of the pack, please.
It's completely maddening, and like Rosebank just being approved and our environment secretary saying it's part of a just transition to it seems
figuratively and literally gaslighting, right?
And this is what I didn't especially realise before I took this job is how difficult it is to do things. So if you want to do something which you would ostensibly think is supported by the government, plant trees, look after biodiversity, create clean energy, it's really, really difficult. It's almost impossible to get those sort of schemes up and running. And you're just facing like challenge after challenge after challenge.
That's why me and Dan, having experience in the public sector, helped us share that with you, that no, please don't assume this will be an easy thing to do. No, I agree with you. We had a really interesting experience. So we had a trip up to a state visit in Scotland, and Josh, our amazing podcast producer who's behind the camera, the gentleman there was talking about how the young people today are interested in politics. And Josh was like, sorry, all my friends are interested in politics and we're all going to vote. The guy was like, oh, that doesn't fit my narrative. I didn't think that was a thing. And I think it's maybe not this election, but it's definitely the next one. There's going to be a wake-up shock. So clearly the environment has been drawn as the battle line.
Yeah.
The Tories are like, we are going to treat the environment worse and put money first above all else. The next victory will be the ones that say, no, we are going to focus on the environment. And I think this is just that horrible darkness, the night is darkest before the dawn.
Yeah. But yeah, it's horrible to see that recent change of it being kind of like weaponized as a electoral...
and just overnight, right?
Yeah,
just bang.
And you just see that because environmental policy and these sorts of investment models, they take a long time to build up, and you're getting this steady like build up, and then overnight it's sort of like, let's strip it away and kind of undo all the work we've done in the last 10 years.
It's funny, we'll get, are you concerned about regulation in the natural capital? I'm like, no. Bring it on. We'd love regulation. We're intending to shoot so far above regulation. We want more of it. Yes, please. It's just not coming anytime soon.
Yeah. Which, I think, because there is that question of like, you sort of almost get from environmental circles challenge on the legitimacy of like having a business and being a business involved in conservation.
Yeah.
I think we just can't rely on the government to fix this problem. It's not going to happen. We've been shown that like time and time again.
They're not coming.
It's not going to happen.
Nope.
And we have to do something. We've got to do it now because we don't have the time to wait for someone to come in and fix it.
The business is the only force of change we've got that can act to do the right thing. And I'm proud of the fact that we're a for-profit organisation, because if we can find a way of demonstrating that everyone out there who pays into a pension, if your pension funds can contribute to regenerating the world and making it a better place, and looking after you in your future, both financially and literally giving you a future, that's the answer.
Yeah.
That is a complete perfect. Who would choose? No, actually, I think I'll keep it in oil. If you can demonstrate that you can do good and get that same safe return, no one would choose the oil.
Yeah, people want that. That's what people, and this is like investors and people putting into their pension.
Yeah.
They want a product where they can invest and know their money's doing not just kind of making money, but also doing good. And if we can deliver something like that, that's what we need to do.
Like, we've been in a hugely fortunate position with the support of Auction House of not having to raise. But everyone we've spoken to, our experience has been, oh yeah, we want to invest in that. Because everyone wants to.
Yeah.
Which it's so funny. We met one group that said to us, oh yeah, no, every call doesn't go like that, and we're kind of like, it kind of does. Yeah, because they believe in the hope, and people want to find that hope. So,
and if we don't do it, then we are going to be fucked. Like, if we
what's the alternative
way to invest billions, if not trillions of dollars of money into the environment over the next 10, 20 years, we're not going to tackle climate change and biodiversity loss, and the planet's going to be left to a point of, almost.
I just think about the lady that we were at one welcoming event at a site we'd purchased, and a lady sat in the middle of the room. The angriest one always does. Were you at that site? I don't know. It was B&H. Yeah. A lady sat in the middle of the room, and opening question is, you're going to put wind here, aren't you? And you're going to stop me killing foxes. I said, love to see you. Hope you're enjoying your lunch. Yes, we'd like to try, and yes, we'd rather you didn't kill foxes, please. And we ended up having a conversation about, what's your solution to transitioning away from gas and oil? She went, I don't care. I'll be dead. Which is the alternative, right? You either try and do something to make a difference, or I don't remember that lady's name, her approach to the world. And I would rather choose giving my children and their children hopefully a future on this planet than accepting that they won't have one. Mm. So I'm going to segue into my final question, Chris. I only asked this to OC team members. What does scaling conservation mean to you?
To me, it means I kind of like a radical change from what's happened before in terms of basically the finance that we put into it. I think for basically my entire life, we've put conservation at the very bottom of our financial priorities, and we've invested like very, very little into it. And it's always been the lowest issue. What for me scaling conservation has mean putting it right at the top and delivering a massive influx of finance and restoring a huge swathe of the UK for biodiversity habitat.
And if anyone's going to do that, I believe it's you. Chris, thank you so much for coming and being part of Oxygen Conservation and for your shoot room session today. That's us done with Chris. Thank you. Bye-bye.